You ready, Mac? Let's just start. I want to start sort of like we did the last time. It's so funny, and maybe this might stay in the podcast. It
Okay,
might not. I don't know. I think I I actually maybe what I can do is provide context for who you are, because I think it's important for everybody to comprehend the magnitude of the stature of you and who you are, your persona and your accomplishments. And I'm not saying that defines you as a character, as an individual, but I think it's important to just see, in the last time we spoke, I had told you the first thing that I threw in 10th grade for the first time. The first day we went outside and we learned drills. The second day, my coach put in the VHS cassette, and on the VHS cassette was you with Al Feuerbach and then also with
yeah,
Wolfgang Schmidt. And so my first exposure was this guy who was known as Multiple Mac. He had thrown 79 meters in the javelin. He had thrown 63 or something like that in the hammer. He had thrown 70, 98, if I remember correctly, in the discus. He was the Olympic champion in 1976. He was the Olympic silver medalist in 1984. He was fifth at the Olympics in 1988. And he also threw 21-10, something like this, in the shot put. Um, and that was my first exposure,
wow,
was literally like I could see this guy like lifting and throwing mainly, and talking about all these things. And I think like I was fortunate enough to that we had VHS
right.
cassettes, at that time, and then DVDs came out, soon after, or maybe it was at the same time. But I wanted to go into like, where did you start? What your beginnings were, and I have a pretty good idea, but I think sharing like your first exposure, into throwing, and then also as maybe a middle schooler or a teen, and then also the other sports you did, and how that all started before we really get into the nitty gritty
Sure,
of your career.
sure. So I liked to play when I was a young kid. I'd hustle home from school in second and third grade and follow the rules. You got to go in and take off your school clothes and put on your play clothes and your play shoes, and then you go outside and you got to be home by dark. And so I everything. It's like you got to be creative, and sometimes you got your younger sister along who's 2 years younger, and the kid down the street who's a year younger, and the kid up the street who doesn't play ball very often, and he's older. And how can you make a game that's interesting enough to keep all parties involved and challenging enough for you so you can find a way to have to work things out and figure it out and even improve your skill, and just a creative process. Go out and play, and I think that's a the creative part of it is something that's real important for uh, anything you're doing in life. Is if you're not curious, if you're not creative, um, you're really limiting yourself. And so we had to work hard. And I know, I don't know, second grade, third grade, I figured out I was taught by my mom how to make hot cereal, so that one of the other rules is you can't go out and play until you have breakfast on the weekends. And I didn't want to wait around for mom and dad to get out of bed. So I'd get up at 6 o'clock and, all systems go. Let's get out there and start doing stuff. It was barely light, but first I'd have to cook a pot of hot cereal. And, and of course I'd eat some, but what do I have to do to get to where I want to be?
Yeah.
So, um, and then, when I was in seventh and eighth grade, I had Osgood-Schlatters disease, and I couldn't do any active sports. My knees would hurt so bad if I'd say, "Oh, the heck with it, I'm going to go out and shoot baskets and play a little basketball with the guys in the neighborhood." I'd come home at night and they'd be hurting so bad, and I'd be in bed and sometimes crying. Even it was so painful, and I thought, "Man, I just want to play, and I'm going to be unable to do that and be crippled for my life." And but I could play golf, and I got pretty good at golf actually, and I think that helped me with my throwing later on. So my first year of real organized sports was not first year, but school sports was ninth grade. I'd played baseball and little league baseball, and I went out for baseball when I was finally cleared to be active again, and I didn't get to play much, and I wasn't as into it because I hadn't played for 2 years, and I'd grown from like 5'7" to 6 feet tall or something like that, and 6'3", and I was just couldn't do baseball instantly after being out for 2 years. So I
Yeah,
quit. I quit the little league team and started working out with the guys at the high school, the track guys, and every Thursday night there'd be an all comers meet, and we'd all get in our get a ride and go to the all comers meets. That was pretty cool. That was fun to do. But I went out for track
I
for the
love
first
those
time
meets.
because I wanted to be a more coordinated and a more fit football player and basketball player. And
Okay.
that's how I got started in track and field
So where
as a conditioning
paint
tool
for us.
for football and basketball.
Okay. Where at this time, okay, let's say sixth grade to ninth grade. Where were you living at that time
Okay,
in the country?
sixth grade, seventh grade, and I was in Tacoma, Washington, Lakewood. It's just south of Tacoma.
Okay, so Tacoma, and then you end up by 10th or 11th grade, you moved to
Yeah, I
Beaverton,
went to Beaverton High School just for 1 year,
Oregon.
my senior year. After my junior year, I
Okay,
left
okay,
Tacoma and moved to Portland. Went to Beaverton High School.
okay. So mainly grew up in Washington, the Pacific Northwest, and this would have been um, 1966 to
Yeah,
1969, somewhere
right.
in
I
that time frame. Is
graduated
that
in '69, and we lived in Portland for some
okay?
grade school, and then moved to Tacoma through fourth grade through 11th grade, and then back to Portland for my last year of
Okay.
high school, and then I went off to college.
Okay. And then I did want to just, for anyone who doesn't know what Osgood Schlatter's is, it's like an issue with the patellar tendon and your where it connects to your tibia, and it would leave. And most people who have this, it'll have like a little bump at the bottom of their knee that could get really tender. And some people will have that bump for the rest of their life, but they never really have that same knee pain. Just for anyone who doesn't know what that is, but I also think it's prevalent for people who tend to be growing quite a bit in that 13 to 15 age realm. And I wanted to go from that is you couldn't do anything physical during those 2 years, and then you talked about getting to the point where you then got to be able to play basketball, play football. Do you think that 2 year time frame of not really being able to express yourself as much as possible led you to yearn almost for the freedom to be able to go do something and the creative outlet? Like you'd have these thoughts and these ideas and what you wanted to go do, but being almost trapped, you couldn't do that. And do you think that time had any impact long term on where you ended up going as an athlete
For a couple of
mentally?
reasons, I think you could be very well right. I think it held me back, and I wanted to get out there. I wanted to play, and I wanted to be with the other guys doing sports, and I couldn't. I couldn't even take PE. I didn't have PE in seventh and eighth grade, which maybe is no big deal in this time. But hey, man, we had mandatory PE classes, and you had to dress down, and you had to get in and take a shower afterwards in this room with
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah, yep.
And I don't think people do that anymore. I'm not sure.
We had to wear the same. I think my class was the last class where we had to wear the gym uniform, where we had to wear
Oh,
like we were a school that
yeah,
was red and black, and we had
right.
black shorts,
Yeah,
white t-shirt. And after I graduated, they stopped doing that. And I think now it's just like, okay, now you don't shower, you
yeah,
don't do any of
yeah.
that stuff.
What the heck is going on? And Yeah, then so you shower after PE class, and then you go to whatever sport, basketball or football, and you shower after that, and you wear your street clothes to and from school with two showers in between. But so anyway, it was a different time, and yeah, it was. I was building up the desire to compete, to play. I just like to be. I like to be active. I like to play, and I think also something that helped is that it might have held back my development a little bit, and it held back my satisfying my urge to be involved, so that when I was in a better place to do this, like when I was in college, there was all this passion, all this desire, all this built up. Let me at it, and it was perfect timing to, turn the jets up to 100% and go for it because I had the resources. I was in a situation where I could do that. You can't do that in high school. You know,
Right,
you
right.
can nowadays maybe,
Okay, so
but I couldn't then.
but at that time you didn't have the access to the people who could potentially cultivate
No,
your full steam
no,
capability. Um, so walk me through then you're throwing in high school, running in high school, but it's mainly for conditioning and for like just getting in shape for football and for basketball. Maybe walk us through 10th, 11th, 12th grade, but maybe 10th and 11th first of like what track was like, and then how football was, how basketball was,
sure,
and then how things started to veer off the football basketball track into
sure.
the off the no pun
Yeah,
intended on
yeah,
that one.
yeah. So in ninth grade, my first year of track, I thought it was for conditioning and coordination for the other sports, but didn't take too long. I was in there and I was throwing the shot fairly far. And I was the tallest guy on the team and throwing the shot the farthest. So I'm the shot putter. And I also ran hurdles and I ran on the 800-yard relay, 880-yard relay back then. And so that's kind of a neat thing. I like that I had some success, and of course, success is fun. You always want to have more of that. And then sophomore, I go out for football, and I'm a starter on the football team. I got a hip pointer in the second game, and it's like the crest of your ilium. I think that's what it's called, and it got bruised really badly. And so in the morning, I'm kind of hobbling along, and finally by the afternoon, I could walk normally, and I was running at 70%. And the coach gave me a hard time. He thought I was dogging it, and he said I was afraid of contact. And um, yeah,
Classic
yeah, come
football.
on, Euro, and be a real man out there. Coach, I'm hurt. That's as much as I can get. I can't. Um, he didn't tend to believe that, and my dad played 3 years in the NFL, and he said, "You don't have to put up with this. This is horse crap. You don't have to deal with that. Why don't you just focus on basketball and track?" I thought really hard about that because I mean, football is a big deal. But so I did. So I only played 1 year, and then the rest of high school was just basketball and track and field. Basketball was frustrating because for me, it was a 3 month sport, and you can't really develop much in the way of skills if you're only doing the sport, a skill sport like shooting a basketball or dribbling, 3 months out of the year. You've got to be doing it a lot more than that. And I enjoyed it. It was fun. Playing defense and rebounding were two of my better contributions to the team. But in my mind, that was just a matter of thinking and preparation and hustle. You move your feet fast enough and you fight the other guy for the spot that you think is going to be the best spot on the floor, and you're going to get rebounds. And you're going to play defense and you're going to shut them down on defense. So I enjoyed doing that. I was frustrated by the ball handling and the shooting aspect of it. But So um, I'm getting toward the end of my senior year in high school, and I didn't really know. I honestly didn't know if I would be good enough to play sports in college. I really didn't. I thought maybe I could go to this school that had a good reputation academically and play intramural sports or something like that. And then I,
Do you remember what you had thrown
yeah,
by then? Like what you had
yeah.
thrown
When
javelin?
I graduated from high school, my best in the javelin was 195 feet, and I got the coaching from a
Okay.
guy who had thrown the javelin the year before at the high school, and that was the only coaching I got. And he showed me how to hold it, what kind of a grip to have, and he showed me to do the crossover with my right foot going around on the outside of the left rather than behind it, as in baseball, like a shortstop. And so I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
wearing my
yeah.
football cleats, throwing off of the grass, and not knowing what the heck I was doing, and developing kind of bad arm slot habits and stressing the elbow a lot. But so I threw 195 feet before I graduated, and I threw 170 feet in the discus and 58 feet in the shot. And not that it's a brag or anything, but I hadn't lifted weights really. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks in a PE class on a universal gym or something like that, and nothing like what even a PE class today for regular students it would be like in terms of strength training. So,
Right,
um,
right.
I had no clue. I got a letter from a community college in Eastern Oregon, way out in the desert area, and Blue Mountain Community College, and they wanted me to consider coming there to play basketball. I thought that was really cool. Thought I was pretty big stuff. Um, so uh, yeah, I didn't really know what I was going to do until finally it was close to the end of my senior year, and I was in Eugene for a track meet or something, and Bill Bowerman said hello, and finally continued talking, and he offered me a scholarship to go to Oregon, and I thought, really? You're going to do? You think I can do this? Okay, sure. I'm not going to Harvard to. Uh, well, I had some other schools like that to go to, but I don't have plans to become a concert pianist or a rocket scientist or something like that. So sounds like fun. Let's go to Eugene and do track.
So at this point, I did have some questions. The discus would have been a 1.6. The shot that would have been the
Right,
12-pound
right.
shot still, right? Okay, 58 feet. And by this time, you mentioned I don't know, maybe you go to the state meet or something, and it was in Eugene. Eugene's starting to become, I guess, fairly well known as a track location. What was the like? What if you can? I don't know if you can like think about what it was like as a 17, 18-year-old kid to meet Bill Bowerman, but what was that? What was his aura at that time, or what was his
Well,
reputation at that
he
time?
had already established Oregon as a track power back in the mid '60s, early '60s even, and uh,
Okay,
so they were well known and well established. And the state meet at that time was in Corvallis at Oregon State University. They also had a strong track
okay,
program, probably not as well known as Oregon's, but they had some Tim Vollmer, uh, Steve Diatremont in the hammer, Tim Vollmer in the discus, Dick Fosbury, of course, and they had some sprinters. Anyway, both schools were well known and well developed, even in the early mid '60s. Um, Before I was going there,
okay.
but so to meet Bill Bowerman, um, you know, here's a famous guy, and how do you do, Mr. Bowerman? Hi, I'm Mac Wilkins, and nice to meet you. He says, I know, in his understated sort of way, and um, he could see I was just a naive young kid, and so he was kind and gentle, and he wasn't a jerk, and seemed to treat me with respect. And I look back at it, and that was the one of the key things that determined where I ended up going to school. I was accepted. Go
So,
ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, like, you brought up your high school coach, and I'm just thinking through this lens. It's like you're the high school football coach. You brought this high
Yeah,
school football coach up who seemed to be like the classic. Yeah, I don't want to offend football coaches out there, so sorry to all of you, but like you can be well known to be maybe not as much as it used to be, but certainly a little bit hard on rough around the edges and a little bit, they can be disrespectful to a point. And I think like someone who it seems for me on the outside trying to look at this is like, okay, you're a creative, and I want to relate this actually back to your the in the interest of freedom of you with making your bowl of hot cereal and being like, all right, I have, my parents are letting me have this freedom. They're giving me a little bit of a
right.
leash to go out, and if I can do this, they trust me, they respect me. And so it's like that simple lesson around that bowl of cereal probably carries through, where it's like, all right, well, this guy I didn't really like, and I can't associate with my freedom to have this creativity that I really like in this athletic endeavor. But then when you meet someone who is so, at that time, and historically speaking, even today, looking back, pretty very well known, arguably one of the best, or one of the most well known track coaches in the world, in the history of the world, possibly, arguably. He treated you with respect on that first engagement, and I don't, we'll find out later through all these conversations how he treated you long term. But it seems as though that's such a key point in your story already, is like, if I have someone who's going to help me along the way, they've got to be respectful, and they've got to be genuine, and they have to be someone that you look at, that then you value the fact that they're going to help you grow and be creative and have success, and that success is probably going to be derived off of like your playtime, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
training,
yeah.
probably.
Exactly. And I'm that's interesting. I hadn't looked at it like that, but I have to agree with you 100%. I mean, I quit football as a sophomore in high school after being a starter for the season because the guy didn't think I was hurt and thought I was a wimp. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, I think if you stick out, you remember this so and so and so and so, a couple of years older than you, and yeah, well, he was the same way, but he stuck it out, and it made, he was really glad he did, and it made a big success, and blah blah blah, and I think it'll make a better man out of you if you stick this out, and that's something, now that I think about it, that is something I never forgot, and in fact, that was
Yeah.
motivation after my football career was over, and motivation in high school and even in college. Bullshit! It's going to make me a better man to put up with
Did
your
you
crap. You're a sort of a semi macho bully, and you're gonna you're that's not how you motivate
did
me,
you ever
buddy.
see, no, and I was going to ask, let's say fast forward to, the last 20 plus years of once after your throwing career ended, your athletic career ends, as a coach, did you ever catch yourself maybe almost communicating in the sense that he had communicated, or were you almost always like, this is what I don't want to be, and this is where I need to be, and I'm going to stay as far away from this area as possible? Like, did you ever find yourself being like,
It
I
may
don't
be
want to coach
once
that
or
way?
twice, but um, at that time, because it had been such a part of my outlook on life as an athlete, it was that's how I am as a coach. When it would be when I wanted to push somebody or move them forward, it would be more along the lines of, okay, now we've been doing this training load here. Now today is, if you feel good for it, here's a day when you can really go after it, and you decide if this is what you want to do, and you're going to find days when you really want to go above and beyond, and those will be days that eventually will add to your growth down the road. So you've got my permission to be a little crazy and go for it. And oftentimes it would be like lifting or something like that. It's very hard to do that when you're trying to learn a skill. I mean, how do you try harder to be relaxed, for example? But
Right,
you,
right. Okay, so I was gonna now rewind back to we're back in high school. You haven't thrown 178 yet. I wanted to start to like nitpick and break down like what was your first experience by yourself? Like going out, getting a discus or a javelin, and what was it like? Here's some disc, here's a jav. You can this summer if you want to
right,
go out and throw.
right.
Did that, was that an early part of your career where you might have went out and you had your bowl of cereal in the morning and it's like, hey, I'm going to go out and I'm just going to throw for three
Yeah,
or four
yeah.
hours. Like, what was in the
Absolutely,
summertime? Did
that
that
did, and
happen?
that was a huge part of the sport for me was doing that. I played football and basketball as a sophomore in high school. So high school was only 3 years: sophomore, junior, senior, and so I was the last game of the basketball season. I went up and tried to block a shot and came down and landed on my butt, and both hands were down behind me to stop it, and jammed my right hand up into my right arm, my right forearm, and broke a bone in my arm. Um, and so I had a big honking cast on for several months, and couldn't go out and throw the shot or find out about throwing the discus, which I had never done. Um, so as a sophomore in track, I just ran the 800, trained for the 800 meters. And after 8 weeks, I ran a 2:15. So I was pretty excited about that, but I didn't think that's where I really wanted to go with my track career. Um, it was just a temporary.
215 is pretty good, especially as a bigger
Well,
guy.
a bigger
That's
guy
pretty
weighing
good.
180 pounds, that's still not.
You and Pre could have been on the same. You could have been on. You guys could have been running the
Yeah,
15
yeah.
and the 8, the
I've
5K.
Wayne, I've thought about that. I've thought about that. I really have. Because my goal when I was in junior high, my dream was to go to Oregon and be a miler. When I was in, yeah, when
Oh
I was in
wow,
ninth grade, first year of track, I wanted to go to Oregon and be a miler for Bill Bowerman. And
wow.
so, but anyway, the coach gave me, he knew I had thrown the shot pretty well in junior high the year before and wasn't able to do it in high school as a sophomore. He gave me a shot and a couple of discs at the end of the season. My arm was pretty well healed up and I could go out and throw. And he said, well, here, take these over the summer and you can go out and practice with them. And of course I did. And yeah, absolutely. I'd go out there for hours and hours and throw until I couldn't throw, until I didn't want to. I got tired of chasing the rubber discuses. We threw on a hard kind of gravel dirt packed parking lot, and it was a real pain in the butt during the season because some kids would drive to school and they wouldn't clear out the parking lot right away. Their car would be there because they'd be doing something, and there'd be a car in the middle of the discus area. It would just Anyway, these rubber discs would hit on that hard surface and they could bounce, 20, 30 feet up in the air like a super ball almost, and run forever and roll
Yeah.
and roll. But that was really a big part of the joy of doing it, was just going out there on my own and trying to figure it out. And all I knew was it comes off your index finger and you want to throw it this way. You don't want to have it come out your back of your hand. And a guy who had thrown that year and had some coaching from the coach showed me how to do that. And he also showed me a South African move. And he showed me here's how you do it in the competition, because you have to start inside the circle. And that's all I knew. He said, take that and there you go. And so I I enjoyed doing the South African because it was easier and I could kind of get a feel for it. And I think I threw 155 feet that summer and 145 with the full throw. And I didn't know it's, I ran into really quickly as people would walk by or drive by or something, experts in the discus throw. And man, that was such a huge, huge part of figuring out how to throw far is, does this guy know what he's talking about, or is this just BS? Is he just talking to feel good? Because he's not as tall as
Yeah.
me and he's older than me, but he's kind of bossing me around or telling me what to do, or you know, and it was always I just think about it and think about it, and now does that make any sense? I had no idea. Dane, I had no idea what's right and what's wrong, and probably the best advice I got when I was in high school was from my dad. Came out to watch me throw in the competitions, but he didn't come to training maybe once or twice. And he said, it just looks like a golf swing. And when you relax, it goes so much better. And when you try hard, it doesn't go at all. And that's absolutely so true. And and frankly, my
Hmm.
golfing experience, even though I hadn't carried it over, it was inside of me, and I knew that's something you have to do to throw far. Is you've got to relax and let it happen, and of course be in the right positions and so on. But that's all I had, and that's I threw 179 in the summer with the 1.6, and I threw 155 feet with the 2K. Didn't get the shot any farther. I think I got the javelin to 225 that summer, but pretty much it was just based on very little instruction and mostly go out and throw it, go out and figure it out. And, I can send you a video or I can show you some video of me throwing.
I would
Yeah,
I would love that. I
me as
I
a senior.
I would, yeah. I was gonna say, like, I'm just like, we're trying to think back to that era, and I always think of, like, these are sort of ridiculous thoughts, but I'm always like, what? Yeah, at the time, like, kids today almost, and like, not that this is bad, but we always, I'm just as guilty. I would take a stereo out and we listen to music while we're throwing. And when I grew up, I would have the stereos that I have the big batteries in, and I would throw for a while till the batteries died, basically. But even back then, like, you were just throwing with yourself, like, it's just you and your mind. And and I think there's something really special and unique around that, with creative thought and digging and sort of spiraling through your brain and all these different corners of your thought. And I was even something as simple as, like, flying the discus. Like, how long, like, some throwers might experience this where they go out and they throw a discus, and it takes them months to figure out how to get it to come off their hand well. How long was there anything specific other than, like, the guy before you had shown you that, so you could sort of figure that out and you learn how to fly it well? Or was there anything, even as, on that very precise detail of the discus throw? Do you remember anything early on around
Yeah, no,
something like
no,
that?
I don't. No instruction, no clue.
Okay.
Um, Sometimes it came out flat. Uh, I didn't know how to make it come out flat every time. I didn't know how to sling the discus. I grew up throwing stuff. I threw rocks. I threw snowballs. I threw baseballs. I mean, sixth grade little league, I struck out five guys in one inning, and I mean, I threw hard. It felt good to throw hard, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's my go-to default. And I had to unlearn how to do that later on, obviously. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
but no, no instruction, no clue, just figure it out, and there you go. Sooner or later, you will.
So your catcher sucked because they had two drop ball third strikes, apparently,
Yeah,
which got you to the five strikeouts in one
yeah,
inning, which even further shows us reliance on other people sometimes can be frustrating, and I think that's also like the mind of a thrower
Yeah,
to a point.
yeah.
um so by the time, let's say we get to, you figure out how to get the discus released. Okay, here's actually a good question I have. I'm just
Okay,
trying
yeah.
to flip
Don't give
back
me any
through all the
bad ones,
notes I'm
just good
writing. It's
ones.
like, if we're looking at a benefit of today is like, I can go on Instagram, YouTube, whatever, and I can just go and TikTok and spend hours watching throws videos, like video, like throws
Mm.
videos constantly. And again, I had shared with that VHS cassette story in the very beginning of like, this was my first exposure, was watching you throw. Now, having that thought process of like, this is how I would watch this individual throw and then transfer it over, is also, I think, a skill that you have to learn over a long period of time. Did you have any exposure to like, by that time, had you seen Al Order's throws or anything like that? Had you experienced anything where like, okay, this is the guy who might be the best in the world, or maybe this is the guy who's the best in the state that you were trying to mimic, or had that
Yeah,
not
that didn't
happened yet?
happen until I think probably mm, maybe sophomore year in college. Maybe. And I
Okay.
did see in high school, I saw a little bit of video of Al Order throwing on a, was it a 16 millimeter loop or something that was all rolled up and wound up and stuck inside of a can, and you open it up and it kind of pops out like that, and you loop it around. It just keeps going and going
Yeah,
on
yeah.
this big old honking projector. And I didn't gather much from that. I mean, I don't remember getting much of a connection, and that's interesting because later on it was. I mean, I could watch video over and over and over again, and after 2 hours, at midnight, staring at the thing. Oh, I've never seen that before. I've never
It's
seen that before. Was he
yeah,
doing this all along?
yeah.
Unbelievable. I can't believe I just saw this for the
Hmm.
first time. And this is uh, after a couple of years of watching video and watching it for several hours in one sitting. Um, and
Yep.
and so I'd watch the video in college when I gave up the javelin. I watched the video of Jay Sylvester. He was my technical model, and I'd try to figure out what's he doing and what would it feel like to imitate this move. What does it feel like? And so we had a place to look at video under the a film under the grandstand. So I'd be looking at film, and then I'd go right out and throw. And then sometimes I'd go back in and watch the film, and then go back out and throw it. Try and replicate what I thought the feeling was in my mind to make those
Feeling, yeah.
moves. And looking at video was a huge part of my development, but I didn't really get a connection to my body in the video until somebody explained to me what you're trying to do and what's going on. And I was very lucky to have that from
Yeah.
Frank Morris when I was at Oregon. Before that, if I didn't know what am I trying to do, yeah, eventually there could be some carryover. I would absolutely know there would be, but um, it was faster if I knew.
Man, it's interesting to think. Yeah, I'm like thinking through. I don't want to hammer home this thought process of these, of how a negative asshole from high school football, but it's so clear in the sport like throwing, is that if you have a, I sort of think this, I see this with my own relationship with my son, but if my son is upset about me, tell him to clean up, whatever, he doesn't want to listen to me with throwing, but if he's in a good mood, he'll listen to me. And I was just thinking about this with what you said, with Frank Morris, is like, if you have a coach that you don't like, you're not going to listen to them, and you may never develop the connection of visual to feeling in
Mhm.
study of footage. But if you trust somebody, and you can almost use them as a vehicle to take the visual through this vehicle to the physical. And then after a while, you don't necessarily need the coach in some cases, and in some cases you might. And I think I was going to ask, I just wanted to make that, because I was thinking through it while you were talking about it, and I'm going, okay, LJ Sylvester was your technical model. Walk us through, by this time, freshman, sophomore year, how you went from being a 78, 260, about 260 feet in the javelin. Walk us through like the transition from javelin thrower Mac to discus
Okay,
thrower Mac.
I'll do that. I just had three
Okay.
things come up in my mind talking about coaching and parenting, and I do want to get to those, but I wrote them down so that we'll get to them. The transition from
Okay.
leaving high school as kind of an all-around thrower. You mentioned the 2 years in seventh and eighth grade of not being able to do anything active, physically active, other than play golf. Um, and it was like the gates are open. I got to Oregon in the fall. Classes started, I think, the end of September, 1st of October, something like that. And we had a team meeting that first week of school, and practice starts on Monday. And I said, oh, unbelievable. You're kidding me. I get to start practice
Yeah.
5 days a week next week in October. Holy cow. That's the coolest thing I ever heard of. Oh, a little naive there, but that's where I was coming from. It was like, God, this is so great. Oh, man. What a cool.
Can I
Yeah.
share something quick? There's a guy, Cale Sanderson. He's Olympic champion in the wrestling. He never lost in college, and his dad talked about him. And there's a guy actually in the Pennsylvania area named John Trench whose dad said the same thing. And they talk about their kids and how some kids would go to wrestling practice and they would be crying on the way to wrestling practice, but Cale Sanderson would be sprinting like, I'm going to wrestling practice. This is amazing. And I think it's like that's that's like when it's something that you need,
Yeah.
you want to be good at, and it's like you don't need, no one forced you to feel that. No one was like, you Mac, you better feel that way, and if you don't, then you're a bad kid. It's like
Yeah.
you just loved it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's so interesting. That emotion, I could feel it when you were explaining it. I could feel it myself, like getting in my stomach, like,
Yeah.
oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And it was back in those days, the competitive season never came soon enough. Then I'm, 7 years
Yeah.
older, and oh man, if I just had 2 or 3 more months, if I could have another couple of cycles before I could compete, I'd really do well. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
so
funny.
I was being coached by a graduate assistant in the shot and the discus, and again, it was not a great situation. I didn't. Didn't connect with the coach for reasons kind of similar to the high school football coach. In this case, you've got to know specific technical stuff about the event, and this guy picked it up in a master's track class or something when he was getting his master's degree, I guess, to be a grad assistant. Um, but he didn't, and he didn't demonstrate things correctly, and he was, yeah, kind of a macho bully, kind of not. Look, I'm not a high school kid anymore. I'm only a freshman in
Right.
college, but this isn't how I want to. Anyway, so I did that Monday through Friday, and Saturday, and on Sunday, after he and his wife went to church, Bill Bowerman would meet me at, I don't know, 11 o'clock out on the field, and he would work with me in the javelin. And he'd be there sometimes with an overcoat and or an umbrella and, his good shoes. He just came from church. And back in those days, he'd wear a suit and tie to go to church. And his wife would sometimes sit up in the stands and wait. And um, I'd be running down the runway, and as a freshman in college, away from home for the first time, sometimes it was hard for me to run on a Sunday morning after a Saturday night. So, um, but that was my javelin coaching Sunday mornings with Bill Bowerman, and so we go to the first meet, spring break, get out of the cold rain, and then we're down in Fresno, and it's warm and sunny, and I get to throw the shot, disc, and javelin, and I throw the javelin 240 feet. Like, oh, okay, I'm a javelin thrower. and,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah.
ended up throwing 257 that year as a freshman with really bad technique. I mean, Bill was a great distance coach, but he was not a great javelin coach. I mean, he kind of got me going in sort of the right direction, but certainly not enough details. There were too many big major pieces of the puzzle missing. And one of them was how to block. I mean, I always threw with a very bent left leg um, in the delivery of the javelin, and the other is the arm slot, the path of the arm as it comes forward into the throw. And mine was always out to the side, and it ended up third meet of my sophomore season blowing out my elbow. And so, that was my career as a javelin thrower. And finally, I kept waiting for things to get better and to come back. And finally, January 72 of my junior year, I said, this isn't happening. Let's just do the shot and the discus and pick up the hammer and keep our scholarship for 2 years. And then I'll graduate from college and I'll get a job selling insurance and my life is over. And that's what I thought. And it was a real depressing time of my life. And I finally one day I just said, the heck with it. Why don't I just try a little harder or something like that? Just put a little more effort into it, have a little better attitude, go out there and really work hard if you can work hard on throwing better and improving yourself. And I did better. I threw farther. I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. I like that. Let me try this again, like tomorrow. And so I did, and let's do it again and again. And it was fun, and I kept getting better and better. And so that was my junior year. The 72 Olympics were in Munich. And I started out fresh sophomore year, I threw 170, 175 in the discus. And junior year, right after school, before the trials, I threw 196, almost 60 meters. And I was throwing in the trials. And in the trials, I had a couple of warm-up throws at 205. And I thought, oh, man, this is awesome. And this is qualifying, of course, the day before the finals. And 205, wow, this is great. And I get in there, okay, we're going to measure it now. And all I could do was 182. But so that's pretty much how I transitioned from the javelin back to the discus and the shot. I was just going to do it to keep my scholarship. And then I figured if I put a little more into it, what would happen? It got better. I improved. And so I got hooked on improving. I got hooked on learning how to improve. And that's the whole path that took me from 170 something in the discus to my life record and whatever I did in terms of competition is because I really enjoyed the learning process. And I thought I could do better. I knew that even when I broke the world's record, I knew that I had mistakes that I could improve on. And so and it was enjoyable. It was fun. It was fun learning. Of course, it was fun being good too, but it was fun learning and trying to get better. And the reporters during the Olympic times, they'd say, oh, so what's the deal here? This is really crazy. Not those exact words, but what happens if you're sick? What happens if you get hurt and you don't make the team? You've wasted 4 years. That kind of questioning. And I was like, no, I lose one day of competition in the Olympic Games, but I get a reward every day. Every day I get satisfaction from trying to learn, from learning, and from making my best effort at getting better. That's hugely satisfying. And that's
Right.
something that everybody can achieve. Everybody can get that satisfaction. Not everybody's going to win a gold medal. Not everyone's going to break the world record. That's obvious. But everybody who pursues excellence, who chases the learning process, can enjoy this. And that's what makes the sport, that's what makes sport so great, is the shared learning process.
Well, even when you're just describing that, and it's like, okay, let's just say, let's pretend that the end of 71 happens, and you were like, you know what, the end of 71, I might I might pack it in, but you still, and let's say that you would have happened that way, but you were still at this point then, like, before you got hurt, meeting with Bill Bowerman on Sundays, having the experience of being coached by someone that you knew was a legend, and you had when you were younger, probably 5 years prior, having dreams of being on his team and being
Yeah.
coached by him, albeit as a distance runner, but it shows you, like, it's so much bigger than that moment. It's hard to digest that when you're in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but it does show sort of the learning journey is much more of value to your character development, your individual story, and things along those lines. And I think, like, your story specifically is really interesting here, because you basically had this, and I have a whole bunch of notes here, this moment of, like, I'm gonna be done, and then you got, like,
Mm-hmm.
restarted, rejuvenated. And you had mentioned Frank
Yeah.
Morris earlier. When did Frank sort of come into play with shot and discus, and
Right.
having a, you know whatever the level was, when did that start to happen and have an impact
Right.
on
But
your
Bill hired
throwing?
him as an assistant coach, and he was there, and I got to work with him when I put the javelin down. When I finally decided I'm not going to throw the
Okay.
javelin, my life is over. Um, I got to get a job to keep my scholarship. Okay, this job is going to be throwing the discus in the shot put. Frank was there, January 1972. And
Okay.
the thing that I made a note of this, and talking about coaching and so on, the thing that that helped Frank and I click so much was that Frank studied kinesiology. Frank was an athlete, primarily a hurdler, but he also did the decathlon. And he really liked figuring out how things worked. I mean, and he's been an inventor, and I get so many amazing stories about Frank. But he could explain to me, here's why you want to do this. Here's what you want to do, but here's why you want to do it. And he could explain pretty much about 70% of here's how you do it. And I had to fill in the rest. But also, his philosophy was, and he laid this out to every athlete he worked with, not just me. He said, look, you trust me and follow my advice for 2 years. And by the time you leave here, Oregon, I would expect that you'll know more about the event than I do, and that I can learn from you. And that's pretty much what it was. And I even saw an article, a newspaper article that from way back in the day that Frank sent me, and I was quoted as saying something like, well, over the years, I haven't relied on Frank as much. I still go back to him every once in a while, but I think that's by design. I think that's the way he and I had it planned out. And so he could tell me why I wanted to do things. And for me, it was so important. I had to know why. Why am I doing this? Why is this
Right.
important? Why is a long right leg at the back of the circle? Why is that important? And you know, I see, you see this too, but we see coaches on YouTube, and they'll talk about a throw, and pretty much all they're doing is describing what the athlete's doing. They're not really saying why they're doing it or how they're doing it. It's just, oh, and here they're turning on their left foot, and you can see their eyes are moving around. And, I got to know why, and that's kind of a pain in
Right.
the ass probably for some people, but for me, that's how I coach. I want to say, look, here's what we want to do, and here's why we want to do it. Okay, now common mistakes are this and this because you're doing that and that. And some of this is instinctive and intuitive, but a lot of throwing is counterintuitive. And so you've got to overcome that intuition and develop a different pattern. Once you get the pattern developed, it's no problem. It's intuitive. But here's why you do it. Here's why this person does it, this person does it, this person does it, this person does it. Here's why 10 people over 70 meters do it, for example. And
Right.
I got
Right.
to explain that.
Yeah.
Maybe not everybody needs that kind of explanation, but I did, and so that's how I coach. That's how I teach.
Did do you think Frank being exposed and knowing Jay Sylvester, the first 60-meter discus thrower, the first 70-meter discus thrower, and just having like, and I don't know how much he knew LJ, but he was impacted by him to a point. And do you think that my question is, do you think that created maybe a little bit greater authority in him for you to then elevate his impact on you because you knew he had more skin in the game in the sense that he had been at least somewhat educated
Of
by
course it did.
Sylvester?
Of course it did. I mean,
Okay.
Frank said that he developed a relationship by going to the competitions where LJ was. Most of the time it would be Modesto or sometimes in Fresno. And it got to the point where a couple of things happened. That Frank would go down and watch, and then after everybody kind of wandered away, after all the reporters and the interviews and autographs and so on, Jay would kind of look over at Frank, and they'd kind of acknowledge each other, and then it was time for them to talk. And at one point, LJ said, "How about we do it like this? You tell me what you see, and that'll help me answer your questions." So LJ wanted to aim the conversation at Frank's level of understanding and awareness of the event. And it got to be, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times they'd get together and discuss LJ's throwing in that competition at that day and throwing things in general. But certainly that gave, in my mind, more authority to what Frank had to say, other than, well, we studied this in kinesiology, and here's the way the human body moves. And yeah, yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. I wanted to bring up, because I'm thinking through. You've got Bill Bowerman. We didn't even bring up Prefontaine, which I eventually, maybe sometime in the future, we'll talk about him. I wanted to bring up, you've got Frank, LJ, Bowerman, and then I wanted to bring up Pete Schmock, and the reason being he's a teammate of yours who was a 2-time Olympian, and he himself was super prolific in the era of, in that throwing era, 72, 76. He ended up going on and becoming a strength coach with the Seattle Mariners. He has a huge impact in the strength world at the time. And if I remember correctly, out of the short wearing throwers, Al, Pete, and Brian Oldfield were like well known for this. I know that's a weird one to bring up, but talk about the impact of 72 plus, that timeline, training with someone like him, and what that sort of provided for you as well.
Well, before I start that, let me add one more piece about Pete and his resume. He was, I think, 7 years the strength and fitness coach for the Seattle Mariners. And
Yep.
that was back in the day when there were still baseball guys who didn't need strength and fitness conditioning. Come on, I'm a baseball player. I don't need that crap. Contrary to people like Nolan Ryan and several others who, 5-6 days a week, they'd have a workout. Anyway, back in
Right.
'72, Pete and I were on the same path. He was a year older than I was. He threw farther. He was bigger. He could lift more weights. I mean, one of my goals, I started college at about 195, 198 pounds, 6'4", 198. And I threw my first year or so at 210. And one of my goals, and never lifted weights, one of my goals was to get so strong that I had stretch marks in my pecs. Right. That would have been a sign. That was a sign to me that I was a real weightlifter. I finally got him, but not until I was almost 30. Anyway, and I think it had to do with bad diet. But so Pete and I were maybe, I don't know, or genetics. Pete and I were on the same path. We were both learning and struggling, and but he was a notch ahead of me, and I looked up to him, and I still do, because he's taken a different path after he. He was on the path somewhat as a thrower, as a shot putter, but he's also gone off to a different path where he's very much involved in the whole body. As a being, as a physical being, as an active, moving being, and it's the mind of the soul, it's flexibility, it's the rhythm, and he even spent, I think, a year or two as the fitness and strength advisor, consultant for the Pacific Northwest Ballet in Seattle. Yeah.
Oh, no way.
How about that?
Okay.
Go
Yeah,
look
that's
at
pretty
Pete
interesting.
Schmock in 1974 or 76 throwing the shot, and he's working with ballet folks. So, yeah, that's a whole nother area that I would like to know more about, and admire and respect him for going in that direction. That's part of his business now, is helping folks along those lines. Not so much I don't know if I could say it as a life coach, but
You ready, Mac? Let's just start. I want to start sort of like we did the last time. It's so funny, and maybe this might stay in the podcast.
Okay.
It might not. I don't know. I think I actually, maybe what I can do is provide context for who you are, because I think it's important for everybody to comprehend the magnitude of yours, the stature of you and who you are, your persona and your accomplishments. And I'm not saying that defines you as a character, as an individual, but I think it's important to just see, in the last time we spoke, I had told you the first thing that I threw in 10th grade for the first time. The first day we went outside and we learned drills. The second day, my coach put in the VHS cassette, and on the VHS cassette was you with Al Feuerbach and also with Wolfgang Schmidt. And so my first exposure was this guy who was known as Multiple Mac. He had thrown 79 meters in the javelin. He had thrown 63 or something like that in the hammer. He had thrown 70, 98, if I remember correctly, in the discus. He was the Olympic champion in 1976. He was the Olympic silver medalist in 1984. He was fifth at the Olympics in 1988. And he also threw 21-10, something like this, in the shot put. And that was my first exposure.
Wow.
was literally like I could see this guy like lifting and throwing mainly, and talking about all these things. And I think like I was fortunate enough that we had VHS cassettes,
Right.
at that time, and then DVDs came out, soon after, or maybe it was at the same time. But I wanted to go into like where did you start? Where start? This might I actually get some thing that the character as an
And that's pretty much what it was. And I even saw an article, a newspaper article.
You ready, Mac? Let's sort of like we did the last time. It's so funny,
Here's why this person does it, this person does it, this person does it, this person does it. Here's why 10 people over 70 meters do it, for example. And
Right,
I got
right,
to explain that.
yeah.
Maybe not everybody needs that kind of explanation, but I did, and so that's how I coach. That's how I teach.
Did do you think Frank being exposed and knowing Jay Sylvester, the first 60-meter discus thrower, the first 70-meter discus thrower, and just having like, and I don't know how much he knew LJ, but he was impacted by him
Mm,
to a point. And do you think that my question is, do you think that created maybe a little bit greater authority in him for you to then elevate his impact on you because you knew he had more skin in the game in the sense that he had been at least somewhat educated
of
by
course it did.
Sylvester?
Of course it did. I mean,
Okay.
um, Frank said that he developed a relationship by going to the competitions where LJ was. Most of the time it would be Modesto or sometimes in Fresno. And it got to the point where um, a couple of things happened. Frank would go down and watch, and then after everybody kind of wandered away after all the reporters and the interviews and autographs and so on, uh, Jay would kind of look over at Frank and they'd kind of acknowledge each other, and then it was time for them to talk. And at one point, LJ said, "How about we do it like this? You tell me what you see, and that'll help me answer your questions." So LJ wanted to aim the conversation at Frank's level of understanding and awareness of the event. And it got to be, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times they'd get together and discuss LJ's throwing in that competition that day and throwing things in general. But certainly that gave, in my mind, more authority to what Frank had to say, other than, well, we studied this in kinesiology and here's the way the human body moves. And yeah, yeah,
Right, right. Okay, I wanted to bring up because I'm thinking through. You've got Bill Bowerman. We didn't even bring up Prefontaine, which I eventually, maybe sometime in the future, we'll talk about him. I wanted to bring up, you've got Frank, LJ, uh, Bowerman, and then I wanted to bring up Pete Schmock, and the reason being he's a teammate of yours who was a two-time Olympian, and he himself was super prolific in the era of in that throwing era 72 76. He ended up going on and becoming a strength coach with the
right.
Seattle Mariners. He has a huge impact in the strength world at the time. And if I remember correctly, out of the short wearing throwers, Al, Pete, and Brian Oldfield were like well known for this. I know that's a
Yeah.
weird one to bring up, but talk about the impact of 72 plus that timeline, training with someone like him, and what that sort of provided for you as well.
Well, before I start that, let me add one more piece about Pete and his resume. He was, I think, 7 years the strength and fitness coach for the Seattle Mariners. And
Yep.
that was back in the day when there were still baseball guys who didn't need strength and fitness conditioning. Come on, I'm a baseball player. I don't need that crap. Um, contrary to people like Nolan Ryan and several others who, 5-6 days a week, they'd have a workout. Anyway, back in
Right.
'72, Pete and I were on the same path. He was a year older than I was. He threw farther. He was bigger. He could lift more weights. I mean, one of my goals, I started college at about 195, 198 pounds, 6'4", 198. And I threw my first year or so at 210. And one of my goals, and never lifted weights, one of my goals was to get so strong that I had stretch marks in my pecs. Right. That would have been a sign. That was a sign to me that I was a real weightlifter. I finally got them, but not until I was almost 30. Anyway, and I think it had to do with bad diet. But so Pete and I were maybe, I don't know, or genetics. Pete and I were on the same path. We were both learning and struggling, and but he was a notch ahead of me, and I looked up to him, and I still do, because he's taken a different path after he. Well, he was on the path somewhat as a thrower, as a shot putter, but he's also gone off to a different path where he's very much involved in the whole body. As a being, as a physical being, as an active, moving being, and it's the mind of the soul, it's flexibility, it's the rhythm, and I mean, he even spent, I think, a year or two as the fitness and strength advisor, consultant for the Pacific Northwest Ballet in Seattle. Yeah.
Oh, no way.
How about that?
Okay.
Go
yeah,
look
that's
at
pretty
Pete
interesting.
Schmock in 1974 or 76 throwing the shot, and he's working with ballet folks. So, yeah, that's a whole nother area that I would like to know more about, and admire and respect him for going in that direction. That's part of his business now, is helping folks along those lines. Not so much I don't know if I could say it as a life coach, but
You ready, Mac? Let's just start. I want to start sort of like we did the last time. It's so funny, and maybe this might stay in the podcast.
Okay.
It might not. I don't know. I think